watching Property TV.
Hello and a warm welcome to Property Summits, where you're sure to pick up bags of top tips on how to improve or expand your property business. I'm Emma Birchley, and on hand as ever is our team of hugely knowledgeable experts. First off, we have Nicholas Walwork, an investor and developer who makes the most of his expertise in his role as CEO of the world's largest international property forum, providing advice on how to make money through property. Also with me is Richard Bush, who turned a personal interest in peer-to-peer lending into a professional passion, co-founding the property crowdfunding platform Crowdlords. Tony Gimple also joins me, a man with a direct and no-nonsense approach when delivering advice to buy-to-let landlords, investors and developers, whether that's on tax, accountancy or succession planning. With us too is Paul Mahoney, best-selling author and serial entrepreneur. He's the founder of Nova Financial Group, providing property investment advice with a particular focus on the buy-to-let sector. And our new addition, property investor, YouTuber and mentor Ranjan Bhattacharya, a man full of top tips on how to succeed in property after 3 decades in the business. Finally, completing our lineup, John Howard, a man who's seen it all before, having bought and sold a staggering 3,500 houses, apartments and developments. Lovely to see you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Again. Right, now, permitted development rights. Tell us about those and tell us, are they being used in the way they were intended, Nicholas?
I'll try not to go off on a massive rant, Emma. But permitted development essentially, as most of us that have done any property would have heard of by now, it's the ability to change the use of a property through a much cut down version of the planning process. There's a number of things they look at, but they're generally a lot easier to get through than a traditional planning application. You wouldn't perhaps have to have the Section 106 or social housing contributions, so it makes it a cheaper way of developing. And it opens up disused buildings to recycle them back into the market. My big bugbear with it is recent changes have not only opened up the permitted development, but it's also, as councils have got more familiar with the process, they're also locking it down more and more. And the things that they look at are getting tighter and tighter. And I think, not only the number of things they look at, but they're getting more savvy to it, unfortunately. For us as developers, we like to, find the loophole and build something that's completely legal, but make that extra margin by cutting up the space in a certain way to maximise its value and create some quality accommodation. And as much as that's all well and good, councils are getting more savvy to it, and they are making it a lot harder for us to maximise the use of a number of buildings.
But why would they do that? Because surely it's in their best interest not to have an empty building in their town.
I think it's all about balance. I think what's happened in the last few years as PD's got more established, and last year in, I think it was August 2021, they brought in, a revision of those PD rights, bringing in a Class E and various amendments, lots and lots of amendments. It's quite tricky to get your head around. But ultimately, it's now down to a lot more factors than it used to be, firstly, and that's where you need to get the right consultants on board to kind of help you navigate the tricky rivers of PD that have got more and more complex. And why would they do it is essentially they don't want the bad guys, the bad developers over developing buildings. That would be my view as the main reason they want it, so they write the legislation, they bring in the rules for the people that ruin it for everyone. That's my view.
And so how far removed is what's happening in towns compared to what the central government's plan was in the outset?
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head with the question. In the it doesn't matter what the government bring in terms of legislation and great ideas to recycle property and stimulate the economy and stimulate the town centres back into use. What's happening on the ground is in a number of boroughs, a number of local authorities, they're using their own throttling capabilities to throttle those. We've had something called Article 4 that came in quite early in the process in the original PD rules that allowed them to blanket an area, on a map, draw a line around where they removed those permitted development rights. That was unfortunate enough. You can still apply for full planning in those. So again, it's just forcing you down the full planning route, which for my mind, is pointless. And more recently, they're just making it harder and harder with more and more changes. They're adding more conditions to things. PD was supposed to be, a planning route that didn't allow conditions to be added to a planning decision notice. Unconditional. And they very quickly started adding in conditions, although they weren't supposed to, but you have to do what the council says. So they kind of got away with it. And now they very much can add conditions. And even things like SAM and SANG payments, which are payments for extra natural green space, and all the things that come with overburdensome and expensive planning applications, is now starting to come in the permitted development space.
A couple of things there, though. It is possible to appeal conditions and get those repealed, and those takes a few months to get those done. We've had some very good news on the Article 4s. Article 4, of course, for the viewers, is the mechanism by which councils can say we want an opt-out from a particular PD in our backyard. Now, many of the London councils were quick off the block in applying for these Article 4s, and they got them under emergency powers. But about 8 London councils, literally a couple of weeks ago, just got those bounced out. They were rejected by some. Right, okay. The central government seems to want this PD to happen, and they're being a bit strict about there've got to be a specific reason for them to say not in our backyard.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear.
So what experiences in reality have you had with that as people doing property development?
Well, we have probably got one of the most knowledgeable, or 2 most knowledgeable people here on PD in the UK sitting around here. I'm not one of them. But I've done a number of PD schemes, permitted development schemes, over the years. 2012, when it came out for offices to residential, very easy. Now becoming more challenging, certainly. And I think the government are very concerned about the amount of objections the councils are making. And like you just heard from Ranjan, the great news about this Article 4, that they're being forced to lift them and allow PD. But certainly, I mean, Ranjan and Nicholas, you do a lot more PD than I do.
I'd be just interested to ask you sort of specific examples, really, of the pushback you've had from council. I mean, my understanding is that there's a checklist of criteria, and as long as your consultant's kind of aware of, there are a lot of sites where there's grey areas.
Yeah.
And those, there will be a little bit of a battle in getting them through the criteria. But focusing on the ones that are slam dunkers, there's just no doubt that PD is applicable to this site, they usually go through.
I think what it is, use an example was on, I don't mind saying, on this show, Property Elevator Live that we did together in Billingsgate. There's a chap on there that brought a site that I've invested in, and we're trying to get that deal done. And it's where there's a flood risk. And actually it got bounced out from that flood risk. So it's about giving the council, a number of mechanisms to bounce something out if they just don't like it. And that's the problem. The more mechanisms they have, they just pull it out and go, there's one. We know there's an easy solution, but we're going to bounce it out anyway. And on that particular deal, that lost the other person the deal. We're going to have to work very hard and pay some very high paid consultants and hopefully try and get it through. But it's adding cost, it's adding time, it's adding risk. And that's the real problem. It's not that with the right team, you can't necessarily get it through. Simple and easy and cheaper, yeah.
You're absolutely correct, and I think the new PD that's come out in August 1st, 2021, to meet those checklists, you have to do a lot more reports.
Yeah, yes.
And then the thing with the reports, like noise reports, flood reports and all of that, there's always mitigation measures that you can put in place to counteract any concerns that they have. The question is whether there's enough juice in the deal to make implementing those mitigation measures worthwhile. And that's the issue.
And also, if you've got the enthusiasm for it at the end of the day, because it was very simple at one point, 56 days, you got it, or whatever now.
Or the experience, John. You used to have to write a one-off letter, covering letter with your architect. Here's what we want to do. It meets these things.
And
we
that's
checked
how
the flood zone.
It should have been.
It was fine. Now you've got to write 5 or 6 £2,000, £3,000 reports. And
so it's almost like planning permission.
It's
which was the original questions.
Yeah, exactly.
Is there a
but
point?
It's not almost like planning permission. You do those reports, but the difference is that there's no wiggle room. There's no subjectivity by the council. If you meet the criteria, they can't subject. I mean, you don't have this issue with planning permission where one council rejects an identical scheme, another council accepts it.
No, gotcha.
That subjectivity is not there. That's the advantage and certainty for developers.
You two have done a lot of PDR projects. Do you ever decide that it's better to go full planning than just go for permitted development?
No.
Never.
And so why is that? Is
Well,
it
as Ranjan's just said, there's still the subjectivity issue. And I think PD still is easier than full planning, isn't it? I mean, it clearly is.
We haven't got the
because
social
it's-
housing impact for starters.
You haven't got the social housing. You've also got
True.
dwelling mix. I mean, if you're looking at, like we do build to rent schemes. So what does our market want? Typically studios, 1 beds. If you do under planning permission, you want to build 10 flats, they'll say you want a couple of 3
Mix,
beds,
a good
2 beds,
mix.
1 bed. I don't have to bother about that. If I can rent all 1 beds, I can do 8 1 beds.
Yeah.
And I can do that under PD, I can't do it under planning.
On this topic, the mix is key, because in smaller sites, like we've got a
Yes.
shop with a couple of uppers, you can't fit a 2-bed and it's not big enough. So you need a small 1-bed, and that's the only thing that can
Yes.
work. So it brings in an element of the commercial market, the smaller commercial stuff, that now becomes more viable to develop
Yes.
with the PD.
Yes.
Actually, whether it's PD or business development or full planning, talk to the council, read the plan, find out what they've done in the past, what they want now, what they want in the future. You know, what's that? People have spoken before, you've probably heard this one, but it's, you know, there's a lovely saying about, in order to keep a cow healthy, you have to milk it every day. Well, do it with soft hands and a straight bat. Find out what they want, i.e. the council.
I love what you're saying, Tony. isn't it?
Sure, there was some mixed metaphor there.
Find out what they want, work with them and not against them. And
Yeah, it's easy you
But
saying that,
isn't,
Tony.
isn't the point of PD that doesn't
You
matter
don't
what
have
they
to.
want?
Yeah,
Exactly.
it doesn't matter what their legislation should be. That's the whole
whether
point.
what it should be, but if they're on side and it meets all the criteria, there's less reason for
Yes,
NIMBYism
there's
or
no point
somebody.
being
On that point, though,
antagonistic
guys,
towards
why,
them.
why do you
Exactly.
think, why are councils so often painful about these things?
Well, I think, look, who do you submit your planning application to? You submit it to development control departments. It's not, it should be called development enablement, but it's development control. And that's what they want to do.
It's a box
it's-
ticking exercise, isn't it?
And it's often political.
Does it tick these boxes, X, Y, and Z? And they look for every possible box. so
And
that-
now, of
'cause
course,
they're
they're more savvy
employees.
about it as well. Whereas in the early days,
exactly, more savvy.
probably really knew what they were really doing. Now they're almost,
Yeah.
they are the PDR police almost now, aren't they?
Yeah, I think it's not really fair to say under the old rules they didn't know what they're doing. I think under the new rules, they've given the
more powers.
criteria, they've been given more wiggle room or say no room, which is why we need to do more reports.
You are watching Property TV. You are watching Property TV.
So what happens if, for example, you see an office block comes on the market, you think, right, that'd be good, I could turn it into apartments. Under permitted development rights, you might think that'd be easy. But is it now the case that you should think twice? You might have to worry about what the councils are going to do?
Well, I think certainly from my personal point of view, you should always use the professional planning consultant who hopefully you built up a rapport with and you trust, because ultimately they will advise you, hopefully correctly. But I always still want to have permission granted prior to actually exchanging contracts, and I've done that on a number of occasions under the PD rights.
What happens if more than one person fancies that office
Well,
block?
I get it agreed in principle, subject to, well, it may not be subject to anything as far as the seller's concerned, because of course PD rights technically you can get within 56 days. So I crack on very quickly with the application, get it in, and I'm unlikely to exchange contracts before I have a decision.
And when you're dealing with an office block, how different are the costs involved on getting that outline decision compared to if I wanted to convert my attic?
Well, you pay so much per unit, don't you guys? I mean, you two do a lot of it, more than I do, but I mean, you pay, but it's certainly cheaper than a full planning application.
No, I mean, it's all the reports. See, there's a number of reports you need to back it up. You know, you've got to remember the member of staff in the council isn't a developer, they're not commercial. They want to tick a box to say, I'm happy with the flood risk, I'm happy with the acoustics, happy with the highway situation. They're not highways experts. So now you need to write that report and show them the highways is fine. There's nothing to be concerned about.
So
It's
you
got
tick
an-
the boxes
They
for
just
them
want
so
to
that
tick
when
all
they
the
go
boxes,
through,
and
you
they
can
go,
see that it's all
and
there.
they read all the reports,
Okay.
and you've given them comfort from third-party professionals that everything's in order.
I think it's hit the nail on the head, and that's what we do with all our planning, our PD submissions. You do their job for them. What they have in front of them is the criteria for granting prior approval for permitted development for a particular application, and you just show them in your submission that you meet every single item in that criteria list.
What's the average cost of getting those reports done?
It depends on
Between
what it
what
is.
and what?
I mean, it depends on the type of building.
Well, it's like
varies.
1,000
I
to
mean,
5,000 a report. I mean, you can get, an advanced highways report that has turning circles, parking issues, bike and bin store locations, because that takes up some of the communal space that might be used for parking. You might have to do a survey on the movements in and out of the site. It can get quite advanced. I would say highways is probably the most expensive one of the reports needed generally. Stuff like flooding would be quite easy. It's just generally a flood check. But then if there is a flood issue and you're in a floodplain, to then get it through, you then need a report on, is that actually going to be a risk, and what are your mitigation measures? So it depends on the building, what's needed.
And there's sometimes noise, of course, and heritage, because you can do these things in a conservation area as well. But I think the thing that people need to do is to basically educate themselves on what they can and can't do under PD. People need to have that knowledge inside out, because as an entrepreneur, you've got to look at a site and say, well, what can I do with it? And then figure out the vision and also the numbers, and then validate that. I mean, I feel I know permitted development very, very well, but I will not commit to a scheme unless I've validated what I want to do with a planning consultant. And I'll be expecting them to go through all the I's and T's and recheck and double check that we meet every single criteria.
And is it that the same whether you are going for maybe converting an old dentist surgery in the same way as when you're looking at a whole big office block?
Yes.
Yeah.
Rules are same.
Similar. I mean, it's similar in that there's a checklist of criteria to follow. It might be slightly different, like if it's the dentist surgery, it is slightly different. But that is the difference between permitted development and planning. There's no subjectivity. I think some of us, I mean, Nick and I, we've both done PD under the old rules that were introduced in 2013, and they were a lot easier. And in some ways, you can say, well, the stuff that they've introduced now is a little bit harder than that, but it's still a lot easier than planning permission. I would not be able to build a lot of the stuff I've done under planning.
But it's the due deal beforehand that if you're going into the deal, whether it's permitted development, whether it's full planning, you've got to make sure it's going to work for you and for the investor and for the end user. And so it has got the path of least resistance, and it ticks every single box from your perspective. And if it still works, and then it fails, or for some reason at PD, permitted development or full planning, the local authority get in the way, at least you can actually show you've done all the right things, it does meet, and you've got a track record of doing it before.
I think one of the key things to remember at PD, the biggest risk of PD is the things that are not PD, right? So if you've got an office building that doesn't have enough windows, you need a planning app for the windows, they'll block the Windows app to stop you implementing the PD. And that's the subtlety. People see lovely buildings and offices and they think, wow, that's got PD, fantastic. And they forget that adding a couple of windows might knock out 2 flats and the entire viability of the site. But those 2 windows are what the council will use if they don't like the site to block the whole thing.
Was the bigger money to be made in PD before? Are more people aware of it now and thinking that way, and therefore there's more competition for the deals?
Oh, may I answer that?
Please do.
There's someone here, one of the 6 property summits, who has constantly marketed the fact that it's a lot easier and everyone should be doing PD, which, by the way, thank you to that person, Ranjan, for making it harder for the rest of us to buy office blocks now to convert into PD, into flats.
This is about honesty,
thank you.
John.
I'm
Well
being
done.
That's all about. It's all about honesty. So congratulations.
It's all about
And
helping
also-
other people, John.
And also to Nicholas as well, because he's done similar, to be fair. But joking apart, the 2 of you are probably there you are, in my opinion, the most experienced PD developers in the UK, and you have a lot of advice and you have a lot of knowledge, but you still ask the planning consultant advice, and that's the key to this.
That is the key
You're
to
not
this.
arrogant enough to think that you know absolutely everything, even
Check
though
and
you
double
probably
check.
both do.
We
Check
also
and
want
double-check.
someone's PI insurance on the line if they give us the wrong advice.
Also
But
keeping in
on
mind-
that thing
Yeah.
about the deals not being available,
Yes.
I think it's
Thanks for
about
that.
the knowledge. It really is about the knowledge about what you can and can't do with PD, because there are a lot of easy stuff that's obvious PD, low-hanging fruit, and everyone knows about it. But
Well, they
there's
do
plenty
now.
of stuff
Yep.
that the nuances that people don't know. And I still go back to the fact that I would say nearly 70% of everything that we've bought in the last couple of years have been through auctions and commercial agents, which means they were available in the open market. They weren't direct to vendor or off market or anything like that, which means they were available to everyone else, but they couldn't see the potential that we saw.
What were you going to say, Paul?
Yeah, just a couple of points. So you know, some office buildings are horrible buildings, and with you can't do anything to the outside. Okay, there's lots of really old concrete,
point.
you know, not very attractive buildings whatsoever, and you
Or
need
clad.
to think, or clad, or not clad, just really ugly buildings. And are people actually going to want to live there? Is that the building you want to turn up home to every day?
Well,
Is the question?
I have a good answer to that, and I think, there's two answers to that. One is the council are very unlikely, once you've got your PD approved and potentially started to implement it, and they see it's going residential, they're very unlikely to not allow you to improve the look of the building. So that planning app is usually, if it's well prepared, like everything we've been discussing today with good architects, renders and CGIs and all the rest of it, they're very likely to pass that because they can't stop it going residential. Secondly, you know, again, depending on the type of the building, it might be better suited to a different type of tenant. We've talked about displaced people. There's other types of tenant that are less picky in terms of the accommodation that they are in. And as long as the inside is of a quality standard, the look of the building may not matter as much to them. And therefore the model as a developer can still work.
But Nicholas, one thing I think you're missing out on, and that is that if it's in a very commercial area,
Yeah.
although you might be able to do it, doesn't always mean you should. And Richard here won't fund it for you.
Yeah, it's much harder
The
to
bank
lend.
won't fund it
Agreed,
because
yeah.
it's in a very commercial area and he worries about everything.
On that happy note, we are out of time, gentlemen. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Emma.
Today. That was very, very interesting. Until next time, thanks ever so much. Bye-bye.